welcome. Thank you for this is the new season for 2019, and I think there's a few people who would like to say something about jobs. Right? There's at least 2 companies. Anybody would like to stand up and just kind of like give their job spiel? This is Jeff. There you go.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I work for Beeswax, which is an advertising technology company, differentiating ourselves by allowing customers to really maintain the ownership of their own campaigns and customize their own campaign logic using their data that they host and they own, and create optimized data models and things like that from themselves. And we're looking for the first time to build out a platform engineering team. We do have an SRE team, but we have so many SRE responsibilities and commitments that we don't want to distract them. We want a full platform team that's focused on development and the infrastructure that's supporting our system. And we're starting by looking for a senior lead that's going to come in, help us establish standards, and help us build out that team. So if you or anybody you know is interested and would like to discuss further, my email address is jeff@beeswax.com, or you can talk to Connie, she can put you in touch with me.
Yep.
But we'd love to hear all candidates and meet anybody and just brainstorm and talk.
Yeah, anybody here's the bonus thing, which is if you privately email him, he'll tell you the craziest Connie story ever. He used to be my manager. So, and then we got Mike from Compass.
Yeah. And we actually just poached Beeswax engineer a couple weeks ago.
There you go.
So if anybody's interested in starting a bidding war, you can
we do bidding professionally.
So I'm at a company called Compass. We do real estate stuff, so a single platform for agents and buyers and sellers to do all the various things of creating listings and sharing stuff and communicating along. We are looking for people for basically all of our engineering teams. So product teams, front end, back end. I'm on the DevOps team. We do a lot of the same kind of building the platform for the platform kind of stuff. In particular, we're looking for like DevOps systems, security, DevSecOps, that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's one of those like very well-funded startups with like a pool table and snacks on demand and lunch provided every day and all that. So if you're interested or you know anybody who might be, come talk to me afterwards.
What I heard is that they have several. I have no idea how Compass went from like a tiny company to like a huge company in 3 years, but who knows? TSV? No? Yes.
If anybody's interested in working for the coolest hedge fund that I've ever worked at, Two Sigma, our tagline is, 2 taglines, finding value in the world of data. And the other tagline is best place for nice geeks. It's a very cool place to work. It is not your typical financials for those who spend time in that part of the world. If anybody's interested, we're looking for reliability engineers. We're looking for people building infrastructure. We have a Kubernetes team. We have a public cloud team. We're looking for people all over the place. We're growing like gangbusters, and it's a great place to work. What's the name again, I'm sorry? Two Sigma. And my name is Jay Goldberg. You should see me on the invite list for today's thing. So anybody can PM me
On Meetup, yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. So Tim, this is Tim's probably not the first time speaking. He's actually
second or third time.
Second or third time, yeah. I would say so, yeah. This is like a new deck we just kind of created, so I'm kind of actually very excited. So and on top of that, he became our kind of accidental venue host too. So yeah. So
That's my venue was booked tonight.
Yeah, right.
Otherwise, you'd have seen our epic snack room.
yeah, right.
Same with
No,
our
we
office.
no. TSV snack rooms are. We used to actually my current company actually is sponsored by them, and they would go to TSV and go like, oh my god, I gotta go to this stuff. But that's just what it is. Anyway, so without further ado, there it is.
All right, thanks, Connie. So, as Connie said, I'm Tim Appnel. Been here before, but if you haven't met me, I'm a product manager with the Ansible team. I actually have been involved in Ansible since version, I think, 0.4, 0.5, somewhere in around there, very, very early on. So I was a contributor. I later became a customer of Ansible's. I then later joined Ansible as an employee, working in the services team, and then moving on to the product management team. And kind of came along for the ride when Red Hat acquired Ansible. So I've kind of done the full life cycle. There was a time I used to code a bunch of PRs, including the synchronized module, which apparently has gotten me banned from writing code anymore. The engineering team will not let me live that one down, but oh well. So with all that said, I'm going to be presenting today about the future direction of where we're going with Ansible. This presentation is kind of a bit high level and theoretical. It's not by no means it's a sales pitch, but it's about what we've been observing and what we're thinking about and where we're going to be steering Ansible over the coming years. Keyword, years, of what I'm going to put up here. This is going to be rolled out incrementally over time. So there's not going to be this OMG and then we throw this switch and everything changes inside of Ansible. You're going to start seeing changes rolling out slowly over time. And we felt it was important to start communicating this stuff to the community so that as you see some of these things start rolling out, you understand what we're thinking and what we're seeing and why we're going there, so that you understand what the end point is, what we're looking at trying to achieve through this incremental change over time. And it's also, we think, important, we want to roll this stuff out incrementally to get feedback and to understand, are we doing the right thing? And if we aren't, can we make a course correction to make this better or direct it in a way that solves use cases better or makes that transition easier for all of you. So with that said, let me start diving in. This here is the first commit to Ansible ever. I put this up here because I want to take a brief moment to reflect on the philosophy and the design principles that Ansible was designed upon. I really think it's important because this context will inform how Ansible moves forward and evolves while still maintaining what made it so successful, that made it such a great tool to use, that's helped it achieve all the things that it has so far to date without losing that, but still moving forward. So from the beginning, Ansible was designed to be a frictionless automation tool, and it had a very specific philosophy that we keep coming back to as an organization, to be simple, powerful, and agentless. And those things we've seen has led to Ansible's success and all of its adoption out there. And it's something we keep coming back to all the time. We still have debates and arguments all the time about balancing out the simple with the powerful. And I can't tell you how many PRs we've gotten where people want to introduce an agent into Ansible and they get like whacked over the head and banished. So it's something that we continue to keep in mind and keep striving towards. Another thing inside of how Ansible was designed is that the code base was designed for contribution. More recently, the GitHub did the Octoverse survey. We came in number 7, whatever it is, 92 million or some ridiculous number of projects inside of GitHub. We're number 6 or 7. We actually outpaced Kubernetes, which was kind of even surprised us. So it's that active, we have that many contributors and things coming into it. So the code base was always designed to be pluggable and provide a lot of opportunity and a lot of flexibility for people to contribute at all different skill levels. It was never a monolith, and that really helped contribute to all that success, all that activity, and community people like you joining in. Another thing is that Ansible was designed to have a lot of option value, which is, if I invest my time, what am I going to get out of it? So it just gave people a lot of opportunity to contribute and get something out of that, and that brought a lot of people, makes the code move faster, makes it move better. It then just means that the code will live on. So that's really, we think, been important to all that Ansible's accomplished. Another thing that we found has been instrumental to its success is the batteries included model. I mean, we took this off of Python, which Ansible is primarily written in. It is something that we kept going, which is have a rich, versatile, standard library of functionality as soon as you install Ansible. You don't have to go through installing packages and everything just to get a working functional system. You have this strong base right out of the box. So that's been key also. There's a bit of vanity stats. Just to, I've talked about how much we've accomplished. If you don't believe me by now, here's a few vanity stats to hopefully prove that. We're now up over 14,000 forks of the Ansible core right now, over 35,000 stars. We've had 40,000 commits. We have over 4,100 individual contributors at this point to that code base. And like I said, there it is. Okay, it was 7, not 6. Octoverse, we were the 7th most active in terms of contributors, and we're up there with number of comments and issues filed, and a whole bunch of other things. We're way up there at the top with some really other big projects like Kubernetes. So hopefully you believe that we've made some accomplishments, but if not, it's not just in our community. This is a business stat that we put up. This refers to Tower. It took us 4 years to get 1 million nodes under management with what we do with Tower. It then took another 7 months to get to 2 million subscribers. So we just see this continuing to accelerate. And this isn't counting people that just use the command line tool. This isn't counting people that use AWX. This is just what we as a business can track in terms of our enterprise customers who pay for Ansible Tower. All right. So that's all great. Hopefully you believe that Ansible's been a success and an accomplishment by now, has accomplished a lot by now. But there's a lot of work to be done. I pulled out this quote. I don't know if anyone gets the...
Is that because IBM...
Yeah, so this is the second CEO of IBM who made this quote. But it also, I think, is very, very relevant to what we're talking about here today. Whenever an individual or business decides that success has been attained, progress has stopped. We don't feel that we're not declaring success. So there's a lot of room for improvement. We're going through some growing pains, and we're looking at those and saying, what can we do about these? What do we need to do about these? Just to give you an idea of what some of the growing pains are that we're aware of, and this list could be dozens of pages, but I boil them down to the most, let's say, greatest hits that we hear out there. The sheer number of the volume of contributions is starting to weigh down our ability to release the Ansible core. We're seeing bottlenecks in participation that aren't making us happy, and I don't think it's making contributors happy. And another thing that we've been grappling with, especially with it making harder to make releases of Ansible, is that a lot of it, we have now 2,450 modules in the current release, and I think the one that's coming up in a few months, it's going to take us up like, we're approaching 3,000. That's where I'm getting to. There's that many modules in there. We're talking all type of vendors, all type of tools and platforms, and they're constantly rolling out new features, finding bugs, new offerings, and they're wanting to bring that into Ansible, but then they're having to wait for the next release to come out in 3 or 4 months' time. So we're seeing a lot of these different release cadences, which are making it hard to keep up on and get functionality and fixes to you, the end user, in a timely manner. Another thing that we've been grappling with and seeing our growing pains is because Ansible is so flexible, there's been this dramatic expansion of the use cases and the problems people are trying to use Ansible to solve. We've gone into Windows, we've gone into network automation. We recently announced we're going into security automation. We see videos of people automating their Raspberry Pi stacks, of automating the setup of their MacBooks. A number of use cases are pretty dramatic that Ansible can cover, which is a great thing, but at the same time, it also makes it challenging to have expertise and eyes on all of these things at once. Also on that end, we're seeing a lot of opportunities as we talk to customers to provide more value in what Ansible can do, especially for new users or users that are just looking for help, that are under-resourced. And another interesting thing that we've started to see is that there are other projects and products that are starting to embed Ansible as their automation tool, underlying tool. Some of the Red Hat tools have already started embedding Ansible in it. Rather than create their own automation tools, they're saying, you know, we're just going to use Ansible, we're going to stick it in this product here. For example, CloudForms has it. There's a release of Satellite, they're starting to use it. There's a few other vendors that aren't Red Hat that are talking to us and working with us to embed Ansible in it. So we're starting to see this trend of people wanting to embed Ansible technology in their product. So these are all the growing pains that we're going through. So what does all of this stuff mean? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think this is what we're kind of going to be dealing with. You know, we got a car speeding down the road, and you got a crew precariously balancing the car and going out there to change the tires as it keeps careening down the road. That's sort of the job we're looking at here in a way. Hopefully it's not as dangerous as this looks, but it is something that is in front of us, a challenge that we need to take on. And in doing that, we're realizing that Ansible is evolving and it needs to become a platform. This is not a reinvention of Ansible. It's really an evolution. I want to stress that word, that this is an evolution. We're just seeing that Ansible simply cannot live up to its full potential as a couple of discrete tools, meaning Ansible Engine and Ansible Tower. We need to think of it more as a platform and approach how we design features and how we develop Ansible towards that endpoint. So what I'm going to talk about is ways and the things we're going to have to do to embrace that evolution and the type of mental shift that's going to require for us in the community to go through as we continue to work that way. And I think it's worth mentioning that this isn't even something that we just decided one day. It was more like we're talking to customers, we're talking to users all around the world, and we were just seeing this form. And we feel like we're just actually starting to chase where people have already begun going with Ansible, and we just want to make that, embrace that and make that better for everyone. So, you know, the key is going to be is still keeping that same frictionless way that people have come accustomed to using Ansible and what Ansible is known for as we go through that evolution. So another thing, so the first thing that leads to, if we're going to embrace this as a platform, is that we're going to have to introduce some sane options to supplement the ease and simplicity of the batteries included distribution model. Now, don't freak out if you're a big fan of batteries included. That is not going away. We are not saying we're going to kill batteries included here, that you're going to have to install everything in future releases of Ansible before you can use anything. It's just that, you know, we recognize that this has been a significant contributing factor to the success of Ansible, and that people love it until they can't get a feature, or they can't make a release of something they need to get out there, a bug fix or something. So we're trying to work out, you know, we're realizing that we've just reached a volume and a size that having batteries included as the only way of distribution is not going to work. We're going to have to, like I said, provide a few sane options in order to add some flexibility, but still maintain the batteries included approach. So that's what I'm going to be diving into more. But don't freak out. I did not say we were killing batteries included. I actually got some boos and hisses in Belgium the other week when I gave this presentation. Yeah, they're very, they don't hide their opinions at all over there. So, so one of the challenges, so the first thing that happens when we start thinking about a platform and we start saying, all right, we can't go with the batteries included approach because of these different release cadences and how do these different vendors contribute and make releases, and we bring some level of flexibility to you know, be able to push features out there. assumptions. There are assumptions that we've relied on with Ansible that have contributed to its success that now have changed. So they no longer become invalid. We can't rely on them going forward. So, for example, some of the assumptions we've been able to make that have helped Ansible's development in getting things out the door are things like whatever is in the develop branch, the main branch of Ansible, is all that counts. We've been able to just say that, you know, past versions and all, we don't care. It's only when we're bringing in and merging something, we only care about what it's getting merged into at that moment. That's not going to work going forward. Things like compatibility of code and naming conflicts and quality checks were all done and are still all done for the most part via code review and the watchful eye of our core committers, sorry. They also are code committers, but the core committers that can merge code. That's causing a huge bottleneck in taking our engineers' eye off of developing new features because they're reviewing so many pull requests, or they're ignoring pull requests and upsetting contributors because they're not getting around to looking through all the pull requests because they're off maybe writing a new feature for our next release. Another thing that you know, we've been able to work off of that's going to change is that testing was also streamlined because we only had to test the current version of Ansible with any contribution coming in. And one other thing is that the vast majority of the functionality that was going into Ansible went into a single path. So you didn't have to worry about initialization problems and you know, reading through the file system and indexing what plugins and modules you had available because you only had to look in one place really for it. So these were all assumptions that now are starting to go away, and that means we now have to start thinking about a lot of new functionality to deal with these assumptions changing. For example, one of the first things we identified was that we were going to have to deal with managing namespace conflicts and incompatibilities. So what I mean by that is if you have content coming from the outside, what if you grab vendor A's stuff and you grab contributor B's stuff and they've named a module the same thing and you want to use both? Well, there's nothing in Ansible today to help you resolve that or manage that. It's going to be whichever one loaded second wins. That's not a way to go forward with reliability and reliable software. So we're going to need to build in some means of managing, to having namespaces so you can manage those type of conflicts inside of Ansible with this content coming in. We're going to need to be mindful of initialization performance. If we have content in multiple spots coming into the system, how can we do that without inversely impacting the performance where the initialization of the system takes too long while it's, you know, grabbing all this stuff and figuring out what it has to work with. We need to start thinking about how do we do quality control and testing when stuff is coming from the outside in. How do we communicate this stuff better to contributors so that we can keep the Ansible quality up and the ability to test different versions of Ansible to make sure it's solid and going to be compatible when it's rolled out into the field. And another key thing we need to worry about is versioning, so that we don't break things in the API so that content you maybe create for version 2.8 won't break in 2.9 when it rolls out.
Never take my company's
Right. So, and yeah, we already break it when it's all in one big mass. Imagine at the Python level, and you're writing a module that you don't know if it's going to run against 2.8 or 2.9 or whatever versions come after that. We need to have a better, more automated way of doing that sort of thing and managing that type of stuff. So it's not just these assumptions changing, that when you think about it as a platform and you think about the possibility of having some external content coming into the Ansible core engine, it also brings a lot of new requirements that we're going to need to have to address and tackle. And I have here a list of what they are, and I'm going to just go right into the details of each one. So the first thing that became very clear to us quickly is that we're going to have to introduce a new packaging format. We're going to have modules and plugins and roles that are coming from the outside into the system. How do you package those? How do we communicate those? We don't have a way. We did take a look at Ansible roles, and you can embed modules and plugins in there, but we found that they were entirely insufficient for a number of reasons in it. Probably could have done 4 or 5 slides on that, but we don't have time for that tonight. So roles weren't going to work for us in and of themselves. One of the biggest problems is that a role, you have to declare it in a playbook, and by the time it reaches that point in your playbook, certain plugins have already initialized, so what do you do about those? You know, for example, so that was like one key thing. Another thing is that one of our engineers started seeing how far they could push a role with doing all the different types of plugins and modules, and found all sorts of corner cases, and it was determined that in order to fix all these corner cases would take more effort than to do this work here. So we just decided that roles were, as they are today, are a dead end for this, this direction. We're going to continue supporting roles. I'm not saying they're going away. It's just for this use here of how do I communicate or transfer or I gotta think of a better word for this. But how do I bundle up this modules and plugins and roles to give to someone that they can put into their system? Roles isn't going to do it. So we want, it's not to say though that we can't borrow many of the concepts and conventions that have come out of roles. And we are, in fact, what we are designing does look a lot like a role in some ways. It's still simple, lightweight, and it's very consistent with the Ansible way of doing things. One of the things, if you didn't get from what I've been saying, is that one of the things with a role can only hold one role. That's it. We got a lot of feedback. People want to package up many roles together and have modules and plugins that maybe work with those roles all in one thing. So this will, this new packaging format will need to be able to handle multiple modules, plugins, and roles, and it also needs to have the potential for handling other types of Ansible-related content in the future. One of the things that the OpenShift team's been working with us on is something called Ansible operators. Operators are some new hotness in the Kubernetes world. The OpenShift Ansible team have worked together to give and are working on a tool that will allow you to write operators purely in Ansible and deploy them into your Kubernetes cluster. We may need to put that in this packaging format. We're not sure yet, but we want to put that sort of flexibility in there. So the requirements of this new packaging format are, we're calling Ansible Content collections, and there is right now a pull request, which I have up here, that is working on implementing the beginnings of that functionality to these things called collections. So this is something you're going to be hearing from us a lot, is talking about Ansible Content collections, and it's going to be this, these artifacts that contain modules, plugins, and roles that you can install and utilize inside of Ansible. There's going to be a lot more coming out on that with the release candidate of version 2.8, which is coming in a few weeks, and then going into Ansible Summit in May. So heads up, you heard it here first. All right, so if we have a new type of packaging format that's coming along inside of Ansible, you need a tool to manage this. This is something we have, like, our engineers have been waking up in cold sweats for years trying to avoid having a package manager inside of Ansible. But it's just reached the point where our engineers have said, you know what, we just can't avoid this anymore. We've reached that inflection point where we need to have something. So I love this quote from this guy named Sam Boyer. He wrote an article on Medium. I printed it out one day to read on the train. It was like 60 pages, one blog post. And it was this in-depth discussion of package managers and all the ins and outs, and how package management is always a recipe for pain. The question is what pains are you really willing to suffer through, and what trade-offs are you going to make? That's the main thesis out of it. He talks about all the different ways making a Go package manager that he went through. And I love this quote here that really captured the spirit of that package management is pain. Package management brings some complexity, and there's just no way around it. So this is why we were trying to avoid it, but time has come where we just have to deal with it. So in introducing a new content package manager, we looked first at the Ansible Galaxy command line tool and found that was entirely insufficient. And really, it was never a package manager. Many people assumed we had a package manager, and that was the Ansible Galaxy command line tool. That was never the case there. So we kind of said, all right, that tool's not gonna cut it. After a bunch of us read the article from Sam Boyer, we said, all right, what can we do to minimize the inherent pitfalls of package management? They're going to be there, but is there something we can do to minimize those and not get too crazy? Like people kept bringing up the whole, what's it, NPM packaging and some of the debacles that have happened there, and we've looked at a few others and where people blown their foot off and their whole head off with how they develop their package manager, and we're aspiring to avoid as much of that as possible. So one of the determinations we made was to try to prioritize simplicity over flexibility and other package management norms. We are considering not adding certain features because they introduce too much complexity rather than to keep things simple. Another thing that's going to be a little bit different for people that might look at the Ansible Galaxy command line tool is that this tool would be strictly focused on management functions, not development. Ansible Galaxy kind of had some development functions to it and also had some content functions to it. We're just going to make this strictly a content management, or focus on the content management. That's under a tool that we call Mazer that's out there, and you can look up the code base, see it being developed there now. Little piece of trivia, does anyone know what Mazer comes from?
Mazer Rackham?
Yeah, exactly. So Mazer Rackham is a character from Ender's Game, and Ansible, Michael DeHaan, who wrote Ansible, was reading Ender's Game and saw the word Ansible in that book. I said, oh, that'd be a cool name for a project. So we went back to that source material, and that's a character that helps the hero get along and learn the ropes, so to speak. So that's the trivia on Mazer. So Mazer is something that we're working on now and hope to introduce by May, at least a tech preview of it. All right, so another thing that comes out of this is, okay, so now we need development tools. Python has plenty of development tools that are out there, and we've been able to, the Ansible core engine team's been able to use them to its benefit because we had one single repo really to deal with, and so they were able to put together some additional tools that were expressly made to help the Ansible development, but also heavily rely on just Python tools that have been out there that help any Python developer, not just Ansible people. But what we found is that the tools are good, but they are somewhat insufficient outside of the single repo that's there. So we have tools in there like Ansible Test, for example, but you can't, Ansible Test assumes you're running inside of the core engine repo, and if you take it out and try to run it on other code, it kind of breaks and blows apart. We need to fix that sort of thing if we're going to have and help developers like yourself develop content that lives away from and outside of the core engine repo itself. What did I miss here? The other thing is we want to make it easier and encourage as many people as possible to participate. So we want to make it development as easy as possible, as frictionless as possible. I mean, development is hard, but we don't need to make it harder than it needs to be. So we also want to really encourage reuse, the stability, best practices and what you're doing, just like we do in the core engine. So anything we can do to do that, we need to help create tools that encourage that from happening. And we need to find a way to be able to automate and scale ourselves and our knowledge. So what better way to do that, or at least partially, is through those tools. We need to get away from the manual code review. And we think tools is a way to do that. So so early on, as we were figuring this stuff out last summer, starting to plot this stuff out, we were looking around, or I was looking around and saying, well, what do we need here? We need a testing framework. We need tools to help people out. And we identified a couple that we ended up adopting. So these are now official Ansible projects. One's called Molecule. It's a testing framework. Right now, it is only for testing playbooks and roles, but we intend to modify Molecule in order to help in the development and testing of collections. So that means adding a lot of functionality for testing Python code and PowerShell code and things like that to the Molecule test framework. But we looked at that and we said that, wow, there's this great, albeit small, but very passionate community already out there developing this test framework for Ansible and out there talking about it all. Why would we want to reinvent that wheel on our own? We should really utilize what's already been started. And we talked to the maintainer, the guy that created, a guy named John Dewey, and he worked for Cisco and said, dude, I'm so busy right now, this thing's yours if you want it. So we had to go through a few hoops because he works for Cisco, but Cisco was actually gracious and allowed us to adopt it, and it's now an official Ansible project. So we moved the repo over, and you can find it under the Ansible account, under Molecule. And another one that we came across is a little less complex, but still very handy, is Ansible-NYC, and that's a static analyzer that will look through your playbooks and your roles, and it'll do dim best practices and checks in the system. So it'll tell you, hey, this you could do this better, you shouldn't do this, those type of things, and kick all that stuff out just by analyzing your content. We've already, since October, when we just got this in under the line for announcing the Ansible Fest in October. We've integrated into Galaxy, that now when you submit something to Galaxy, Lint runs over it and will kick out things that could be better in it. We actually put a scoring system against it to try to help people as they're searching gauge what we consider the quality of this work that's coming into Galaxy, to try to help differentiate from the 1,100 different Nginx roles that are up there, for example. What's nice about Ansible-NYC is that you can write more rules and extend it with your own rules. So we're going to constantly be adding more rules and continue to add more functionality to it. Like I said, like Molecule was adopted and now been migrated over to the Ansible account. So if you want to check that tool out. I believe both of these you can just do a pip install Molecule and a pip install Ansible-NYC. They're standalone tools. They utilize the core, but they're not a hard dependency, actually, I don't think. Don't quote me on that. I take that back for a second. All right, so moving right along here. Another thing that we identified, that this one's a little bit of an outlier from the rest of the stuff I've been talking about, but nonetheless, when we were looking at how can we add more value to what end users are doing and what contributors can do to contribute to the overall Ansible ecosystem, and we identified a number of different things that we could do to enhance roles, bring them more into parity with the way modules work, and make them easier to share and be reused. So one of the things we're trying to, we'll never get rid of it, but at least slow it down, is what we call the fork and modify pattern. So we see a lot of people that go, oh yeah, that's a pretty good role. They bring it down, they fork it and make a few changes and then publish their own version of the role. So then that's how you end up with 1,100 different Nginx roles out there. So we were looking at, well, what type of things can we do to make them even more portable and easier to understand and easier to reuse. Because sometimes what we found is someone just couldn't bother looking through the role itself. They just said, screw it, I'll copy it or do my own. So that's led to 3 different ideas, and some which are already in the works. So one's the idea of the ability to implement what I was calling ad hoc role execution. This is the ability to run a role from the command line without a playbook. It's very much like we have ad hoc commands where you can run a single module and say, target this inventory, run this module on that inventory, and you don't need a playbook, and it runs, and then once it's done running, that's it. We're looking to add similar functionality where you can say, here's my role, run it on these servers for me, and it just runs, and you don't need to create a playbook. We saw way too many playbooks that were like, here's my host, here's a single role. And that was it. You know, and a lot of times people were just doing that as a one-time thing, and they would have to create a playbook in order to just run one role. So we wanted to give them a way to be able to do that, just grab a role, go with it. Another thing that came out of that examination is that modules, you have an arg spec where if you give it a bad value or a parameter it doesn't know, the module and Ansible will very quickly fail and say, hey, that's wrong, right? This is supposed to be an integer and you gave me a string. Or I don't know what this parameter is, or this one was required and you didn't give it to me. So try that out with the module, you'll see how fast it fails, and also that no network connection happened and nothing else really ran. We're saying, how could we maybe do that with roles? Because what we ran into is we saw too many roles where it would be like, oh, like the 10th task in, something fails because the person using the role didn't give a required value to the role in order for it to operate. So we were like, how do we make this fail faster and give people an easier understanding of what that role needs to run, but also a way to validate, does this role have what it needs in order to possibly finish successfully? I mean, you can never guarantee that, but these are some things we think you could determine very quickly up front, and we should give users the ability to do that. So there's a proposal for that, and then that's turned into a pull request where they're starting to develop a role argument spec that you can provide that to a role, and it will run that at the start of the role, and if it doesn't meet that arg spec, it'll throw a hopefully useful error message and just stop at that point. And then the third thing that's come out of that, I don't know if actual work has started on this right now, but it's to provide a standardized embedded means of documenting your roles. So you can use like Ansible-doc and find out what will a role do, what does it take, what is it going to do. Right now, people write README files, which is fine, but they're in all type of different formats, and they don't maybe cover certain things that they really should cover, or they don't, or they just use the README file stub that the Ansible Galaxy init creates. I always love those. So we want to provide a way, just like we do with modules, with plugins and all, a standardized way of embedding documentation so that a role developer can write docs and we can easily, everyone can easily extract and find it and validate those docs to see if they're up to par and what they expect. All right. Again, a little bit longer than I wanted to, but sorry, I somehow did this in 30 minutes in London. It's like, man, talk about perpetuating the stereotype of New Yorkers talking fast to the British. I think I nailed that one. Anyway, so one last thing we're going to have to do is enhance the Galaxy Hub. So it's galaxy.ansible.com. We're continuing to improve the search and feedback you get in the user experience of that right now. We're having to deal with some things of going from roles to covering modules and plugins and dealing with collections. For example, one of the things I call here the dash quandary. We've always allowed roles to have dashes in their names, but now that we are introducing modules and plugins, which are Python, anyone's a Python programmer, Python hates dashes in the names of its libraries. So now we have this problem of content out there with dashes that now Python's going to throw an error at us. So how do we deal with that? How do we migrate from that and not piss everyone off? We're just going to piss half the people off. So,
Is that dash E, S slash dash slash underscore slash?
I don't know. We've tried a bunch of things, and we've come to the conclusion we're in the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win situation here. So, yeah, that's a fun little. It's like seems like such a small little thing, and it's turning into such a pain in the ass. Yeah. So anyway, support for collections in Mazer, so that Mazer can work with Galaxy, and we're going to be. This is actually a significant change, though most people won't notice it. Right now, Galaxy uses a pull architecture. So you put stuff into GitHub, and then you say to Galaxy, hey, this is an Ansible role, and Galaxy goes out to the GitHub repo and indexes what it finds. When you say, give me something from Galaxy, Galaxy actually is passing you through to GitHub. And then that gets pulled across. Galaxy itself isn't storing that content. Well, that's creating a whole bunch of problems for us. Namely that we have a lot of people that don't want to use GitHub, the public GitHub. And they want to have other means. And what we decided to do is switch to something called push architecture. So what will happen is when using, I think it'll be in Mazer, maybe it'll be in Molecule. There's debates over where some of these commands and functions are going. The idea is that you will build an artifact, and then you will publish that artifact, and we will store it using another open source system called Pulp. So we'll actually, there's a lot of advantages to that. Kind of running out of time, I've been maybe talking a little too much. But the biggest one is that we won't care what version control system you're using in that case, because we're not pulling from something. You're just sending us an artifact. Whether you're running Git locally on your MacBook and it goes nowhere else, or you're using Bitbucket behind the firewall, or you're using GitHub, the public GitHub, we don't care, because that's version control, that's over there, and when you're ready to do something, you build an artifact and then ship that artifact to us. And we're getting out of the version control business, essentially. So that's something that we're starting to do a tech preview of it to move away from. We're not abandoning the GitHub pull option anytime soon, but we also can't just keep with that indefinitely. All right. All right, so when are you getting all this, and when am I going to shut up? I can answer that first part. So what we have, so some of the things I've already said we have now, changes to the Galaxy Hub are already and continuing to be rolled out. Molecule and Ansible-NYC are official projects now. You can go out and use them, pip install. We were just at a meeting earlier about putting together our first release of Molecule since we've taken it over. A lot of good new stuff in that. A lot of the first stuff you're going to see, the tech preview of collections in Mazer, the ability for Ansible to be able to load from collections, and some of the role enhancements are going to be in Ansible 2.8. Right now, we're a few weeks away from the first release candidate of 2.8 coming out, that you'll be able to start trying out this stuff. Hopefully, all the docs on this stuff that I've been complaining to my coworkers about that they haven't published yet will be out at that time. And right now, the Ansible 2.8 gold release or finals release is due to come out in May around the time of Red Hat Summit. So that's the first week of May. One of the big new features of Ansible 2.8, while we're on that topic, is RHEL 8 compatibility. So the ability for Ansible to work. So there is, for anyone that is interested in some of this stuff or following off the code, this plugin loader enhancements to work with collections and the namespace support. That's the pull request right now. That's a work in progress that one of our engineers is doing all of his work in. So follow along with all the fun. All right. So last thing is just to talk some about, if you're contributing or interested in any of the projects or things I've talked about. There's a list of all the different projects we're dealing with or talking about here. We also have our dev server for the Galaxy project is open to everyone. It's Galaxy-dev versus just Galaxy. And also, if you want to talk about some of these things with some of our engineers, this is on Freenode, these IRC channels. There's Ansible Galaxy, and there's also Ansible Molecule up there. We actually host a weekly IRC meeting on Molecule. That was what happened earlier today, a few hours ago. Talk about PRs and future directions and things. So, all right, thanks. So questions? It's almost a little longer than I wanted to, but I'm willing to stick around for any amount of questions anyone has. Okay.
What were the people in Belgium pissed off about?
Oh, many things. The one on that is that and this is the thing we definitely need to work on. They were not fans of it because they think it's introducing complexity and that we should fix it through community and process, not by separating out the content. That was their saying. It was an open source community event, like completely self-organized. You were there.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like,
That's
I was like, wait a second, you were there with me. So you know what that crowd is like, and they're very, very stalwart open source contributors, which is great. There are 0 vendors there. Just about 0 vendors.
Just come off a weekend of snorting like a
yeah, right. FOSDEM. Yeah, they were at FOSDEM, and then they went to this config management camp. So, but the thing that we're hearing, particularly from our vendors, partners, that they're, the F5s of the world and the NetApps of the world, they want to have their own stuff. Cisco's of the world, and they want to release it when they want to release it and not have to worry about when's Ansible's release window. Like, we're about to hit code freeze. They don't want to hear that, oh, now you're going to have to wait until October for your stuff to roll out because we missed the code freeze window. So really, it's a response to those type of people primarily. Doesn't mean the community can't do that if it so wishes. But what we will need to be careful about is still maintaining the community, even if the code is spread across multiple repos. We're probably going to try to minimize the number of official repos that we manage. We can't do anything about the vendors. If I'm just picking a vendor named Cisco decides that they want to have their own Ansible collection off somewhere or multiple Ansible collections off somewhere, there's nothing we can do. In fact, some of them are already doing that on their own without collections. So we're just trying to say, all right, let's embrace this because you're going to do it anyway, whether we embrace it or not. So we'd rather work with these companies and provide the best we can for all the users. Any other? Yes.
Do you think these collections will either decrease the amount of time between releases or increase the amount included within a release?
I think, so the idea is to decouple the release of the core engine from the content meaning the modules and the plugins from it. So the answer is kind of both. The idea would be that the core engine itself will become more stable because it would be released less frequently. This is the theory that we're thinking about, and that modules could be and plugins could be released at will. So if Azure announces a new hot service tomorrow and someone codes up a bunch of new modules, you can start using it right away. You don't have to wait for the next release of the engine to come out, sort of thing. Or if a critical bug fix comes out, they can push it out and people can start consuming it and using it. So the hope is that we're able to get, those are the things that we find users care about the most. The internals of the engine, they're not as, I'll say, hot on getting their hands around. It's always around the modules and the plugins. So, I don't know, does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah.
That ties into the batteries included, so now there's...
Yeah, so what will happen is that when we do roll out a new version, we will package all these batteries, but then you'll be able to override them with a collection.
Okay.
That's the theory right now that we're going to try to test out. But so it won't still be that you install the engine and that's all you got, and then you have to go out and collect. We'll already package a whole bunch of stuff, but you'll be able to say, all right, don't use this one, use this one over here that I'm bringing in. And hopefully we keep that to a minimum. But, oh, sorry, you were.
Yes. So since all the modules are being split out, is anyone looking at maybe like archiving or deprecating any old modules that are kind of succumbing to that?
We haven't gotten that far yet, but it is definitely something on our radar. And when I talked about the Belgians being it was actually, they were also more than Belgians, they were Germans, they were from all over Europe. But anyway, I was in that was like a concern, is the community governance, and that is something we need to address before we fully embrace this, is how do we handle those sorts of things? How do we handle modules that someone contributed and then dropped off the face of the earth and we don't even know if they work anymore? These are all things we're going to need feedback on, and we're going to need to address before we do anything drastic. The idea, I just want to stress here, we're not blowing all this content out of core. Like, what will probably, I'm guessing, and this is just me right now with reading some tea leaves, is that there'll be a few different repos, and that we will package them all together, that the end user experience still is pretty much batteries included. It's still the same, but the end user shouldn't know that we had to pull from multiple repos to create that package for them. If that makes sense. And then to the person that really needs that new feature, or really needs those bug fixes, they can go out and grab something and utilize it before we do another release. Right.
So that model you have where it's batteries included, but you can update individual pieces of it with the content manager.
Yeah.
What if somebody wants to use keep an older module lying around because, incompatibilities or whatever?
So,
will they be supported?
Supported in the Ansible, like you call it, Red Hat support supported, or in...
Will there be a way to do it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, since all this code is open source, the first thing you can do is just fork the code yourself and create your own collection. I mean, that's the most, I mean, it's a little hacky. The other thing is that these collections will be versioned, so you could revert back to an older version of it. Now where we get tricky is because a collection has will have many modules and plugins, and we are versioning the collection, not the individual pieces of content. If you just wanted one module that was old and the rest new, you're kind of on your own. We tried an internal prototype where every piece of content was versioned, and our heads almost exploded at the amount of complexity that introduced, and we said, no. We are not going to do this. We're going to version on the content and do something that's more coarse-grained, because the dependency mappings were just mind-blowing. It just became very clear to us once we did that internal prototype that this was the wrong way to go and not going to work. So I don't know if that answered your question, but you did remind me of one of the very painful prototypes we did.
Now that you're part of Red Hat, is there any plans to, I guess, kind of integrate with RHEL a little bit? Because RHEL is such a long release schedule. And
yeah, we're still working through some of that with them, but was it 7.4? They started introducing what are called RHEL system roles. So the RHEL team are developing roles that you can run to manage RHEL with that are Ansible roles. And those are supported by RHEL, by Red Hat themselves inside of RHEL. And they're continuing to use more of these system roles inside of RHEL 8, I understand. I haven't talked to them directly since October, but I understand they're constantly working on more of the system roles.
And it's kind of like with Yum had the dependency, so like, I mean, RHEL seems to be tied to kind of system. I think they're trying to break out of some of that with RHEL 8.
Yeah.
But is there, I guess, moving towards like there's an Ansible LTS or something that's connected to a RHEL thing or something? Like
yeah. I think that's being discussed. I don't think it's been determined, but it seems to be leaning that way. That's just me reading tea leaves, but from what I'm hearing, that because of the RHEL release cycle and the 10-year thing or whatever, we're having to resolve that, and they may pin it to certain versions of RHEL and adapt what they're doing. And some of this that you saw came from the feedback that we had working with the RHEL team do what they're trying to do. You know, and they're saying, hey, we don't need 3,000 modules for competing, you know, products and networking on RHEL. We only want this little core bit. Why can't we do that? And we're saying, yeah, we see your point. So, any other questions?
Are you going to give us some demo later on? Sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
At some point, I guess you can invite me back.
Yes,
and
that'd be
maybe
great.
I'll have stuff that's in more of a demoable state. The ones that we have right now are pretty raw and require you to pull certain branches from the project, and it's a little messy. Nothing we want to foist on the world. That's what that March, May window is going to be about, is making that more straightforward for people to try out and test. And again, I will stress all the old stuff or the existing stuff will not be changing. If it did, that's a bug. But we're going to bring this new stuff out so people can start trying it out, start utilizing it, and give us feedback. So, sorry, we have one more. Yeah.
After Ansible adopted Molecule, I noticed that the default verifier is still test infra, which is a third party.
Yeah.
Are there new plans of maybe like introducing a first party verifier?
Yeah, if I have my way, yes. We were just talking about that today on the meeting today. And in fact, an engineer from the OpenShift team that's working on the Ansible operators has a PR for something. It's a native Ansible verifier. Now the one trick is that test infra is the default verifier. We may have to wait till 3.0 in order to make that switch. But if I have my way, that will become optional and go away. Yeah. Because the biggest, my thing coming at the product manager, and this is where the engineers get really annoyed with me, and they go like, dude, you were a coder once? And as we talk about Ansible as not requiring programming skills, we've adopted this test framework and said, this is the official way to test all your content. You should test our content. And to verify it, you have to write Python code. That is a disconnect we need to address. I understand why the team that wrote Molecule did it that way. But now that we own it, yeah, that's something we're going to have to address. So hopefully within the year, hopefully shorter than that, but I'm going to hedge my bet and say we'll address that. I think something will be out soon, really soon, that'll give you what you want, and you don't have to use test infra. It's making it the official default verifier. That one might take up to a year for us to make the switch. So, good eye on that one. I'm glad. Like, every time I say that, everyone looks at me like I have 4 eyes. You'll get it one day. Any other questions?
Well, one more thing. So you mentioned Belgium a number of times.
Okay.
I've been there for 3 years. If you could say something to this crowd about config management, because it's kind of the only general config management industry conference that exists globally.
Yeah.
You know, what was your experience with that?
My experience with that is how passionate all the people are that are there. I mean, because this thing is completely self-run, and hundreds of these people show up and travel from all over Europe to come and talk about config management. They're all talking at the bleeding edge of config management too. That the thing that I love about it is just the passion of everyone in the room, and that's why when people start screaming at me like they did this time, no, they actually did. There was this whole, everyone ever see Clerks? You know, the whole thing, and I wasn't even supposed to be here today. I filled in for one of my colleagues and got beat up because I was the only Red Hat Ansible employee in the room. It's like 100 people in the room, like yelling, yeah! It was like British Parliament or something. Yeah, I was over a thing, a PR called Mitogen that's we're trying to address. But the great part is that some of our top contributors show up to that event. People that are there are so like passionate and smart, and just so dedicated because they all do this as a hobby and get there on their own dime. Very few of them are there on their employer's dime. And, that's the part I love about that conference. it's a cool town, but
Right, so it's a free conference.
Yes.
They open it up like around the end of the year, around December.
yeah,
It is across all kind of config management stuff.
Yeah.
So like if you use Salt, Puppet, Chef, CFNG,
Yeah.
please.
there were still people there.
I'm there. I just
yeah.
You know, people dealing with Kubernetes, like how do you deal with, and like kind of bigger and philosophical
Yeah,
questions, right?
yeah.
Like, how do you deal with config management in what you think of as immutable infrastructure, right? What's the future of your infrastructure? It's really a great place to come. I see very, very few people from the United States showing up at this conference, and for me, as in my company, the subject matter expert in configuration management, it's the most valuable thing that I do every year. Like, I come out of there with one good idea, it's worth showing up. The conference is free. Ghent is a cheap town, it's a gorgeous town. And it's kind of cheap to get the conference.
Yeah.
And it's not terribly expensive.
Or
So,
Amsterdam too.
The first, it's in the first week of February every year.
Yeah.
So look out for config management.
And they butted up against another, I guess it's the biggest free open source software conference in all of Europe. It's called Boston. It's that weekend, and so a lot of people stick around for that and take a short train ride from Brussels over to Ghent to attend this.
And where it came, where config management came from was that configuration management was a completely oversubscribed, you know, like kind of a birds of a feather section
Yeah.
at FOSDEM. Like, people just couldn't get into the rooms.
Yeah.
And somebody from the university in Ghent,
Yeah.
offered up the university for a couple of days to do that.
Yeah, Bert, he's a professor there. He arranged for the space there. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for coming out, and keep an eye out for this stuff, and let us know what you think once you get to try it out.